Hey everybody, welcome here to Pop Culture Philosophers. I'm your host for today's show. I am Rockin Robbie Billups, and I'm very excited for today's show. We have two legends to me and to many people out there watching. Legendary creators, work in animation, work in comics, work in so many things, responsible for so many things that we remember from our childhood or from our adulthood, or things we still go back and visit today. So it is my honor, it is my privilege to host a conversation today between the creator of Gargoyles, Greg Weisman, and the creator of Darkwing Duck, Tad Stones, to talk about their upcoming Dynamite Entertainment 4-issue miniseries, Gargoyles, Darkwing Duck, which drops in January. Let's bring them in, Tad Stones and Greg Weisman. What's up, y'all? How are you doing?
Howdy.
Doing good.
Well, once again, thank you so much for taking time out of your days to come in and talk to us. Greg, you've been on the show before. How you been? How's things going? Loved Fantastic Four Gargoyles. Very excited for Gargoyles FF dropping on Wednesday. So you did a great job. From a lifelong FF fan, I approve. So thank you for that.
Well, thanks for liking it. Thanks for reading it, frankly.
Of course.
Darkwing is not too happy about seeing that crossover. You know, he thought he and Goliath and gang were special, you know, and then suddenly this quartet of, I don't know, blue clothed
Think of it this way,
trying
Drake.
to take over
It took
the thing.
4 heroes to replace you.
That's true.
So
He'll appreciate that. I'll pass that on.
Yeah, 4 heroes, and they had to be recent movie stars. So
right.
That's true.
And Tad, welcome in. You've never been here, so it's nice to meet you. It's absolutely a pleasure. I appreciate you being here, buddy.
Oh, my pleasure. And I want to assure you, as Greg and I do our worldwide publicity tour for this crossover, that we will tell all new lies about the background of the comics and our time at Disney and other places.
Awesome.
So
that way you piece everything together and you get a whole bunch of narratives.
Today is story 8.3, just to make sure we're on the same page with that.
Oh, okay. But you know, I like to improv, Greg, with my lies.
I know,
so,
but you know, just to give you a basic template, we're going with fiction 8.3.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get started. First of all, Tad, I got to fanboy out for just a second. Big fan of your work, right? You've done a lot of stuff. I'm a big Chippendales Rescue Rangers fan. That's one of the greatest theme songs in the history of theme songs. I love that show. I love Darkwing Duck. I've never gotten into Bob's Burgers, but I know that you worked on that. However, you helped create one of my absolute favorite Disney characters of all time, which is Gizmo Duck, which is absolutely one of, like, I loved RoboCop when I was a kid, and Gizmo Duck, he was so funny. I loved the wheel. I loved it. Can you tell me a little bit about the creation of Gizmo Duck, aka Robo Duck?
Yeah, the basically when Disney was just getting into syndication, DuckTales was our first foray into it, and with a brand new management who were behind the creation of Disney TV animation. So when it got into the second season of DuckTales, they kind of treated it as the same way you do a live action show, which is, hey, what are you promising for that second season to get more publicity and excitement about it? You don't want to just go out there and say, hey, that thing you love, we're doing more of it. So they wanted some new characters, just to, what's the name of the dog on Simpsons? Moochie? No. The dog they brought in just to the skateboarder dog. Yeah, it was that sort of thing where, what new thing. And so I just pitched 3 kind of generic, tropes. And the one was an alien duck. One was a Bubba Duck, was a little caveman guy. And the other was Robo Duck. And I pitched that as, because RoboCop had been a huge hit the previous summer. So I said, we all know that huge hit. We're bringing him into DuckTales. And I did the first drawing of, and had a name for him, Fenton Crack Shell. That just pitched the idea of, a hapless guy in a robot suit, that all sorts of things could come out. But I got to say, the actual development of RoboDuck was, whose name, after he left me, became Gizmo Duck, even though they left the R on his chest. A lot of Ken Kuntz and Dave Wiemers were the writing team that really took that character and gave him his living with his mother and a sense of humor, and really how they developed it was all them. Because outside of that initial pitch, which was like, a paragraph long in a drawing by myself, that was it. Although the first time somebody asked me about it, I think it was in one of the trade papers, and I said RoboDuck, I got a lot of fan backlash. Goes, he doesn't even know the character's name. It's like, sorry, deep cut, fellas.
I do remember that when we were developing Darkwing, I was like, we've got to bring Gizmo Duck in here because he'll be like Superman to Darkwing's Batman. And I think that may have been the kernel that eventually grew into Justice Ducks.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. I mean, we were just and you were right there with us. Greg was, one of his first assignments was Darkwing Duck when he came to Disney TV. And the great thing about it is, he had been an associate editor at DC Comics. He knew every Silver Age trope that I wanted to play with, because those were the comics I grew up with when there was little continuity and the most outrageous, goofy ideas. That's when Jimmy Olsen would turn into a giant turtle monster or become Elastic Lad, or, all that stuff. And Superman could do anything or be turned into anything with red kryptonite. That was red kryptonite. Yeah. So, we were having fun with that. Greg was right there. But one of the tropes was definitely, you got to team up heroes. And we did have, Gizmo Duck that we had a core there. And sometimes fans, I would say, Gizmo Duck was our Superman. And fans said, no, he's your Iron Man. And it's like, no, you don't get it. Superman is the guy who gets the key to the city, all that adulation, all of that, all the stuff that Darkwing would love to do and have. And he gets none of that. And Gizmo Duck was very much full of himself, but, again, getting all the cheers from the crowds.
I love that character when I was a kid. I remember trying to make a costume out of like Pringle, containers and cardboard boxes and milk jugs and an old tire. Like it was silly, but it was awesome. Another thing that I love. So I'm the oldest of 6, and my young sisters loved Little Mermaid. They loved Beauty and the Beast. They loved all that stuff. And I liked it too, but I had to watch it too much. Right. And I'm like a 13, 14-year-old boy. I don't want to watch that stuff. Right. Then Aladdin comes out. I love it. There's the TV series. I love that. I know you worked on that, but you were also responsible for, I guess they put the first few episodes together, and that was what Return of Jafar is. And that's like one of the first things that I remember seeing, like a trailer for that on some VHS that we rented. And I remember the date, like waiting for that date and begging my parents to take me to the video store to get Return of Jafar. Blew me away. One of my favorite Disney villains. That movie's awesome. That show is awesome. So thank you for that. I just want to say thank you.
Yeah, that was actually. Oh, go ahead.
I didn't work on Aladdin, but I'm the one who sold it to Eisner. It was really difficult. I had one art card which showed the genie in Aladdin, and I said, Aladdin, the series. And he said, sold. That was my whole pitch.
Greg has such charisma. He was able
to. I'm sure it was all because of me, not because of the massive hit with the movie Aladdin.
Yeah. Basically, when we did all of our syndicated shows, we would start with DuckTales. We would do some multi-parts that were designed to be a movie shown on the Friday night before the series started. So it could be hyped by the stations as a movie. They'd see it, and then after the show started, eventually you would cut it up into episodes and play it as part of the 65 episodes. So that was planned right from the beginning. What wasn't planned is, having been at Disney so long, I had met people in the different departments, and I had met some middle management guys in home video. And at the time, our budgets in TV were starting to really feel them, even though they were generous by industry standards. And I thought, if there could just be one little extra revenue source, maybe we could keep our budgets up, which frankly isn't true. They just say, oh, look, we're making more money by being cheap. Anyway, I called up the middle management guys at Home Video and said, technically, I'm doing the sequel to Aladdin. Would you guys be interested in putting it on a video? And the guy took it to his bosses and they said, no. And then they released Aladdin on videotape, broke all records. And I thought to make the exact same phone call again. And this time they were very interested in. We showed it to Jeffrey, and thankfully the opening, we used the Arabian Nights song from the movie, but we used verses that they didn't use that matched what we were doing. And we had beautiful animation from Australia to open it up. And so we showed it to Jeffrey Katzenberg, and, he couldn't believe how little money this cost me. He says, this is looking pretty good. And at that point, he started to give real notes. And there was a sequence fully animated that was basically a comedic sequence, taking Arabian Nights stories of Abbas Maul, one of our villains, trying to sneak into the city inside a hidden container, and the guards are like putting their swords all the way through it, and he survives, and he stands up, all his clothes fall off in shreds. It was just a fun little thing. But Jeffrey at that point was giving notes like it was a movie, and he said, that just slows the story. Let's move it. Let's cut all this. And it was like, no. But the other thing he did is he let it be finished. Says, finish this like an A picture in post-production. Meaning I got to work with an Academy Award winning, the guy who had won the Academy Award for sound effects on Twister was suddenly doing Return of Jafar. And all the key Disney guys on the boards there were, I was seeing it up in the big screen in the Disney theater as they mixed it. When we did I always think of it as the second one, but now people say, oh, it's the third Aladdin movie, Aladdin and the King of Thieves. That we went in with more of okay, let's really try to make this feel more like a movie with a more emotional story and all of that, as opposed to Return of Jafar was basically there to set up the series and give a reason why Iago could then be part of the team instead of being trapped in the lamp. So
yeah, well, I used to watch that show all the time, man. I loved it. I loved it so much.
Well, I got to say, the feature, I started in Disney features. I used to be roommates with Ron Clements, who went on to do Little Mermaid and Aladdin. And the management of features pretty much hated us, for putting out these cheaper movies. But it was as good as we could do, to put it out. And he did have the ear of Michael Eisner for a while, because what got back to me was Michael Eisner was saying, I'm not sure we should be doing these because it, basically parodying what he had been told, which was, it could hurt the Disney name and a feature length thing. Maybe we should keep TV to be TV and all of that. And he says, so how much did this make? And they told him, and how much did it cost? And they told him, and he went, so what else do you have in line?
I was about to be like, it has to have been a success for them because they kept doing more of these things for other properties,
in
right?
That meeting,
yeah. And what Tad isn't, I don't know if it's clear, but this is absolutely true. Tad created an entire business and income stream for the Disney company, which was then emulated all across the industry, and had been, until streaming took over in the last few years, a major source of studio revenue that paid for many, many things, all coming out of Tad making those phone calls to middle management. I mean, literally, Tad Stones created that business single-handedly.
What got back to me was, and maybe it's apocryphal, but when Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg and Rich Frank and all those guys came into Disney, they suddenly, the company was becoming more and more profitable merely by treating it like, a real movie studio. I used to go, Ron Clemens and I and Ed Gombert and Randy Cartwright, some of the guys from features I came in with, we used to go up to the roofs of all the sound stages. You know, I think I've been on the top of every building that was there at the time, and we'd throw those Whammo Super Balls off the catwalks just to watch them bounce in the empty sound stages, which were being used for 16 millimeter educational film storage. They didn't even think to rent out the place. So Eisner came in, they started saying, well, let's make 12 movies a year, and let's do this, and let's do, you know, just common sense things. And what I was told is the quarter hit, and you know, there was all sorts of executives, when they made enough money, they would get some sort of bonus. And I was told that this was the first quarter where things had calmed down, that they weren't going to grow as much, so no one would be getting their bonuses. And then suddenly, Return of Jafar came in, and those guys all got their bonuses, and it was like, hey, this is pretty cool.
I bet they love you for that, man.
Oh yeah, you would think
so. Yeah, Return to Jafar, like you were saying, Greg, it created this whole new like revenue stream for Disney, but like this, like other companies too, because this predates Mask of the Phantasm, doesn't it? Return to Jafar.
Every other company emulated what Tad had done, and I don't know if they ever gave Tad any real thanks, let alone monetary compensation. They should have, because this was literally a business that did not exist. And suddenly it became a huge, massive money-making business that lasted from whatever year Return of Jafar was, I can't remember now, but until about 2020, when streaming destroyed that business. But
when I left Disney, oh, go ahead, Greg.
I'm just saying, for what, like 30 years, give or take, that was a huge income source for every studio, and all of it came out of Tad, and I don't think he gets enough credit for that. I really don't.
Okay. When I left Disney, one of the projects I did on the outside was for Universal. I did Adventures of Brer Rabbit direct-to-video, and that management told me, and I forget the name of the woman who was in charge of it. It was a sore point with her because she had a direct-to-video probably for Fievel, and then of course The Land Before Times. She had one like set up to go, and I guess it felt like, no, we had the projects, but you know, that was it. But yeah, it made some people's careers, and you know, I started in a feature, so I always compared it to the original feature, and I've learned to stop talking about the weaknesses of it because so many kids grew up loving it, you know, and then King of Thieves was to me a real step up. I felt better about that one, but then again, Disney themselves decided to really capitalize on it. So
yeah, you did start with features. Like you worked on The Rescuers, right? Didn't you?
That's when I came in on The Rescuers. Almost got fired because I was such a bad in-betweener. Just like,
oh no.
What a different history I would have had that happened. But
yeah, well, thankfully we don't exist in that multiverse. So how did you two meet and start this like bromance? Was it on DuckTales? Is that where y'all met?
Darkwing. I mean, it wasn't called Darkwing yet. It was called 00 Duck. But I was a very junior executive at Walt Disney Television Animation in the development department. I'd been an editor, associate editor, and freelance writer at DC Comics for previously, and was still at the time freelancing Captain Atom for DC. But I started working in development, and our boss, Gary Kreisel, my immediate boss went off to Europe for 6 months, and so our boss, the head of the division, Gary Kreisel, said, well, Tad's developing a show, just follow Tad around. So I did, like a puppy or something, I don't know, but and he was working on this show, developing this show that was not quite a spin-off of DuckTales called Double O Duck, but sort of set in the same vague duck universe, and over time it began to morph into more of a pulp fiction, more like The Shadow, or and we began to take on these sort of comic book tropes, which of course I was very familiar with. So,
yeah, that really started. I'd say within mentally for me was kind of the name change. The fact that he stopped being 00 because the people who owned the James Bond franchise said, "We own that. You can't have it."
Yeah, it was supposed to be like a spy thing at first, right? And you even did like
all of that's in there. I mean, basically, we were developing the show. The show really didn't solidified until we added Goslin, the idea that here's this James Bond type, this superheroes, guy who suddenly has a little girl who just from the start, it was like, no, she's not going to stay home. And that required him to move to suburbia, meet these goofy neighbors, which would complicate his spy life. And I guess for that reason, we put him despite his white tuxedo, we put him in a mask and a cape and a little hat. And so, basically when we were told we couldn't use the name, well, actually backing up from that, the first time I pitched him, it was just a straight James Bond parody with Q and Moneypenny clones and that sort of thing. And Jeffrey hated it. And I wasn't particularly fond of it either, but Jeffrey had me do it again. And it was one of our story editors, Dwayne Capizzi, who looked at that tuxedoed guy with the mask and the cape and said, that looks more like a pulp guy. And that, suddenly shifted my focus to say, oh, those are different tropes that we can follow, because all those adventures had supporting characters and all that we could have fun with. And then when the name change happened, or when we were told we couldn't do 00 Duck, and ended up with the name Darkwing and then Darkwing Duck. By the way, it was Alan Burnett who went on to do The Adventures of Batman with Bruce Timm.
You can tell by that name he wanted to do Batman, right? Darkwing.
Yeah, pretty much. Oh, we used to say, well, we warmed him up for the Dark Knight with the Duck Knight. So anyway, that's when all my Silver Age love could come out, and I could to me, all the spy stuff stayed. And in my mind, it was like, yeah, that spy organization is what funded him with all the Batman type vehicles and all that. Because I grew up with Silver Age comics where everything Batman had his face on it, whether it was a Batcopter or Batmobile. I mean, my Batmobile was this thing with a giant bat head on the front fender and a single fin in the back, So that was, again, I was having fun with that. Luckily, there was no internet. I've said this before, that thank goodness, because if there was an internet with all the back issues of Flash, I'd read those and say, I'd be hamstring. I'd say, well, I don't want to rip those things off. But instead, I just had memories of these great Silver Age covers. And I said, yeah, we do things like that. And I used to tell the story editors to pitch me the comic book cover. So hopefully there is a visual element at the center of each show, high concept thing that we could have fun with. Had I actually known the stories, I probably would have been, trying to steer away from stuff too much. Instead, it was like, yeah, thank goodness I have a Swiss cheese kind of memory, and I'm able to, remember kind of things. But I loved the rogues gallery of Batman, Flash, and Spider-Man, and we had fun with all of that.
I was about to ask, was it your love of Silver Age comics that helped develop that rogues gallery? Because Darkwing's got one of the best rogues galleries out there, man.
Oh yeah, definitely. And people assume different things. Like they think the Liquidator, this villain made of water, was based on Hydro Man, and I say, sorry, I was in college during that time and I wasn't getting comics. He's actually based on the Sandman, because I remember in The Amazing Spider-Man #4 or whatever, that the Sandman got out of a situation by going down a drain, and Spider-Man actually, whether in that issue or a later issue, threw bags of cement at him, and then doused him with water, which froze him up, which is something we used. So even though I based on a sand character, that's where Liquidator came from. Same with Bushroot. People think he's based on Poison Ivy. And I said, no, he's literally based on Plant Man, a guy who showed up in Strange Tales comics, which was the Human Torch spinoff of the Fantastic Four. He was just a guy in a cape, and what he did is make trees, cactus throw thorns, and trees swat you with their branches, much like in The Wizard of Oz. And then later he returned once, and he had this goofy costume made out of leaves, basically, not a real scary thing. But that became, that and a little bit of Alan Moore's Swamp Thing is what turned into Bushroot. And Bushroot and Megavolt were my two favorite villains.
Look at that, an Alan Moore inspiration into Darkwing Duck. That's super cool.
There you go.
And now, Greg, Tad was helping, or at least he was very influential when you were putting together Gargoyles, right? I remember talking about this with you.
Yeah, and Tad...
one specific meeting, yes.
One specific meeting, but it was crucial. We had originally created the show as a comedy adventure series, somewhat inspired by Gummy Bears. And we pitched that, or I had pitched that to Michael Eisner, and he passed on it. But Gary, our boss, said, there's something in this, keep working on it. So I went to a handful of people just to show them the pitch and see what their feedback might be. And Tad sort of had the key comment. He had just seen an early, what you might call animatic of Beauty and the Beast. And we had a human female character who was sort of friend to all the little gargoyles in the comedy version of the show. He said, "You got this girl. What if instead of all these little gargoyles, you had one big gargoyle?" And that clicked with me. Again, my background is comic books and superheroes, so I went to an artist named Greg Guler, who at the time was doing props, I think, for Darkwing. But I had worked with Greg a little bit back in my DC Comics days, and Greg and I created Goliath, and we took the comedy development, put it through the prism of Goliath, and came out the other end with the show that everyone's now familiar with. It took us another year to sell it, but that's another story. But if it hadn't been for Tad, I don't know if I would have gone that direction, and that helped us move the show from a comedy adventure show that Eisner didn't gel for him to action drama that ultimately, with a lot of Beauty and the Beast in it, frankly, that Eisner really found appealing, and we.
Am I mixing this up with another show that it seemed to me that you pitched it again with all this a huge card pitch?
Yeah, that was also Gargoyles.
Okay.
Yeah, Gargoyles got passed on twice by Eisner before I sold it. So the first time it was a comedy. Second time it was fundamentally the show that we made, but we got so enthusiastic about it that we put all this stuff into the pitch, the pack, the mutates, robots, all sorts of stuff that ultimately we did use in the show. But we had it all in the pitch, and the pitch was long, like 40, 45 art cards long, and all these characters and all this stuff, and he passed on it. In fact, was even more negative about it that time than he had been on the comedy side. And then the next day, we had a meeting with Jeffrey Katzenberg, what we called in those days a post-mortem meeting, which will give you a hint of
the tone, yeah,
about it. And it was mostly, I think, to talk about Goof Troop or Bonkers or something like that. That is the show that had sold the day before. But at the end of the meeting, we're all starting to get up, and Jeffrey turns to me and goes, "And you're going to keep working on Gargoyles?" And I said, "Well, no. I mean, I was very disappointed about it because I had loved the comedy version of the show, but I really loved this dramatic version of the show." I said, I pitched it as a comedy, he passed. I pitched it as a drama, he passed. I don't know what else we'd do with it. And Jeffrey said he didn't pass on it. He just thought it needed more work. Now, I'd been there the day before, and I know, I knew then that
pass feels like, yeah.
I know what it felt like. I knew what it was. But what, my mind, the wheels are turning as rapidly as possible, which in those days was much more rapidly than they turn now. And what that told me was that, and these were the days before Jeffrey and Michael sort of went to war with each other within the Disney company. What it told me was that Michael hadn't liked it, but Jeffrey liked it. And Jeffrey wasn't going to defy Michael in those days. They had a fairly respectful relationship, at least on the surface. I don't know what it was like under the surface, but in those days they seemed to be partners, and Michael was the guy in charge. And so if Michael said no, Jeffrey wasn't going to say yes. But he felt, and I know our boss Gary Kreisel felt, there was some concern about the Disney Afternoon, that we had all these great shows, and they were all very different in a lot of ways. DuckTales was a high adventure sort of comedy, Raiders of the Lost Ark kind of show, as opposed to Goof Troop, which is basically a cartoon sitcom, right? And everything in between. But one thing they all had in common were funny animals. And Gary and Jeffrey had this concern that on the surface, the Afternoon was doing very well now, but down the road, that sense of sameness, when the pendulum started to swing, would bite us in the ass, and he didn't want us reacting after the fact to a shift in our fortunes. He wanted us ahead of the curve. So I went back to the drawing board now for a third time to look at how we were going to change the Gargoyles show, and I sat down with my team, which included David Schwartz, Bob Klein, Greg Guler, Paul Felix, Paul Lacey, Fred Schaefer, probably more people I'm forgetting right now, Cindy Shupak. And I looked really closely at the show, and I said, there's nothing wrong with this show. The problem is the pitch. And we just, we refocused on the relationship between Goliath and Elisa. By that time, Beauty and the Beast had come out, and as you may know, was something of a hit for the company. And
a few awards, nominations.
Yeah. So we really focused it on their relationship. We cut out the pack, we cut out the mutates, we cut all the extraneous stuff out. Again, good stuff that we eventually, you do 65 episodes of the show, you need a lot of material, and we eventually used all that stuff, some of it even in the first season. But it was distracting in the pitch. It didn't allow you to focus on what was important about the show, which was this sense of clan, but most importantly, this relationship between Elisa and Goliath. And so we just cut. So we took a pitch that had been 40 plus cards, reduced it to just over 20 something cards, and so almost cut it in half. And 6 months later, pitched it again. And this time Eisner liked it. He bought it. And Jeffrey turned to me at the end of the meeting and said, "You added a lot to that, didn't you?" And of course, I hadn't added anything. I just cut things. But I said, yes, I did. And suddenly we had a sold show. But yeah, it took us a year and a half to sell it. Probably working on it for 2 years before we got a green light.
Wow.
And then, another 10 months before it hit the air. And that was a long birthing process, but it worked ultimately.
As you're working on this stuff, do you have other responsibilities that you're having to do for the Disney company?
Yeah, I mean, when Gargoyles got greenlit, we didn't have a story editor, we didn't have a producer, and because it was so different for the Walt Disney Company at the time, the feeling was we didn't have people who weren't at least otherwise occupied who could do this kind of show. I'm not even sure that was true, but that was the sense that Tom Ruzicka and Gary Kreisel and the people running TV animation had, was that we don't have the right manpower for this. And it took Tom, so I was the head of development and sort of on the writer's side. It took Tom a long time to find Frank Parr, who wound up producing the show with me. And it took me quite a while to find Michael Reeves. Both Michael and Frank were people we stole from Batman the Animated Series. And it took us a long time, but the show had been greenlit and we had to move forward. There wasn't, it was greenlit for the fall. There wasn't time to sort of wait for these people to come aboard. So I began making the kinds of decisions that a producer would make as opposed to the kinds of decisions an executive would make. And by the time we had hired Michael and Frank, I went to Gary and said, I want to produce the show. I want to be the showrunner with Frank on Gargoyles. And Gary's reaction was, well, I don't know. You've never been a showrunner before. And I said, that's true. But 5 years ago, I'd never been an executive before, and that worked out okay. So they came back to me, Gary and Bruce Cranston, head of development, came back to me and said, all right, we'll let you and Frank produce this show together, but you have to keep your development executive job, director of series development. You have to do both jobs. And by the way, they paid me for the lesser of those two jobs, but that's a whole.
Yeah, of course.
But from their point of view, the reason they insisted I keep my first job is that they thought I was going to crash and burn as a producer, and they liked me in the development role, so they didn't want to let me go hire someone to replace me, and then once I crash and burn as a producer, there wouldn't be a slot open for me to come back. So in their way, that was them protecting me.
For the lower price, yeah.
Right, for the lower price. But so for 10 months, I did 2 full-time jobs as we did 13 episodes across a 10-month sliding schedule. Then when season 2 came around, and this was a whole other story too, but ultimately the order on season 2 was 52 episodes on a 10-month sliding schedule, minus 6 weeks that they spent dithering around deciding how many episodes there were going to be.
And that's to get you to the magic number 65, right?
Right. And I said to Gary, I said, I can't do 52 episodes in 10 months and keep being a development executive. So that's when I moved over full-time during season 2 to be a producer. But the thing was I had worked so hard to sell the show, and then I'd worked so hard to get it up on its feet before we had Frank and Michael aboard, that by the time I'd normally step away as a development executive, I was so entrenched and in love with the property, and I'd created it too, so it was just sort of it just felt like me, and I couldn't let it go, and so I've been hanging on to it like glue ever since.
Well, we appreciate you for that. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but Michael Eisner, when he came in and took over, Disney television animation was very important to him. I want to know why that was and what the energy was like working in animation at Disney at this time for television.
Well, actually, before he showed up, the licensing side of the company, they really felt they needed to be in television because they had these features, but the features back then came out once every 5 years, maybe 4 years. Usually it's 5 years between them. And then you could sell coloring books and play sets and, tea set up, whatever, and then you had to wait till the next movie came out 5 years from there. So they just wanted to do something on TV, and it kind of saved me. I worked on an Imagineering, designing rights for Epcot Center, and then came back to do Epcot documentaries that ultimately didn't get the go-ahead. And then so went back to features. Now, meanwhile, I had kind of gotten raises as I moved from place to place. So I came back to features with a higher salary, but there's no one at features saying, "Oh, really? Tad's coming back?" It's no. I left working for Wooly Reitherman, one of the 9 old men. He was gone a lot, So it looked like they weren't sure. They sure thought there was going to be a cut and pay in there, but they didn't even have a spot necessarily. And luckily, they say these guys in licensing need somebody to come up with ideas and work with them with an animation background. I went over there and pitched. We had our first meeting. They said, okay, you have to do this thing called Sport Goofy, which is about soccer. It's a huge hit in European comics. And then they said, well, and then we're open to other things with Mickey Doll and Goofy, whatever. We had a second meeting a few weeks later, and I came back with 2 4-by-8-foot storyboards, literally bulletin boards of, drawings pitching these 2 shows. One was a Sport Goofy, Soccer Mania, and the other was Mickey and the Space Pirates. Goofy went into production through very different hands. Took a long time getting development. Meanwhile, my career separated from it, but they remembered me. And so when Michael Eisner came, it was the Sunday of his first week at Disney that he called for a meeting about TV animation. Now, I have no doubt that the licensing people had already talked to him about it, and Michael had started, I believe, his career at ABC Saturday morning. So on certain days, he takes credit for Scooby-Doo. Because there was some executive who says, make him a dog kind of thing. He claims that was it. I think other hands were
So he's
involved.
like the Roy Thomas of Disney. Is that what you're saying?
No, I think Roy did a lot more. Yeah.
I worked with Roy for years, and he was always a gentleman.
I love Roy. I met him. I got to do a panel with him. He's great. It's just I was just goofing on that creator Wolverine thing.
Anyway, they remembered me, so I was invited. I was technically on vacation, and the head of licensing called me up and said, "We know you're on vacation. Could you come to meet with Michael Eisner?" All I knew about Michael Eisner was everything else, what everybody else knew, which is just what we read in the paper. So it's like, I'm not going to say no to that. Ended up pitching. I brought out my artwork from Mickey and the Space Pirates. He thought that was great, but he said, Mickey is too important. We have to make sure we can do this right. And basically his position on TV animation was Disney is the top name in animation. It should be that anywhere there's animation, Disney should be there, but it should be the best. So he didn't expect TV animation to look like feature animation, but it should, stand out when it's up against Rubik's Cube as a show, the other shows that
So were they trying to compete with like those toy-based shows like He-Man, Rubik's Cube, G.I. Joe, Transformers?
No, their feeling was we've got to establish ourselves in television. Although actually there was a merchandising component. They had come up with a show called I want to say Paradise Island, but that's not it. It's something else. Jumbo Isle, I think it's called. And it was the idea. This is where the trade winds cross each other, and somehow that explained why these animals, different types of animals, suddenly mutated to have, half hippo, half butterfly, or whatever. So they came up with this concept and started pitching it to toy companies, and to see if they were interested, just to do a plushie kind of tie-in. This is before the idea of television. Actually, they started working on this, but they said this could be one of our shows. They pitched it to Hasbro, and the guy from Hasbro turned white and left. And then it was said, we are about to go literally into production on a line next spring called the Wuzzles, which are the exact concept. And Disney decided instead of fighting them, they say, let's partner with them. So, anyway, they had to have that show. That was the pitch. That one had to go. But even at that first meeting, Michael talked about other ideas, and he said, just kind of in passing, my kids came back from summer camp, and all they can talk about is this candy called gummy bears. I swear, anything you make with the name gummy bears would be a big hit. And the early development of gummy bears was very much like Candyland. They had a villain called Licorice Whip, and they talked about there should be a dental hygiene moral at the end of every episode, like He-Man used to do. It's like, what a different world.
Flossing is half the battle.
Because their feeling was you can't pitch one show to the networks, because if the don't like it for whatever reason, you're going to talk about the weather, and which kind of happened to ABC, because they basically called up each network and said, we have a show we'd like to pitch. We're getting into television animation. And they took meetings in the order people got back to them. And CBS was the first meeting, and they liked the Wuzzles. So it was kind of like, job done, that's all they had to sell. But they already had a meeting booked with NBC, and NBC said, oh, there's only one show? Well, I guess we'll take it. And that was the Gummy Bears, which was very much, that's more traditional Disney, comedy, adventure, and it had to have heart. And that was developed by Jim Megan and Art Vitello, and they created that show, did a great job.
Love that show.
And then
Love that theme song.
ABC just had a nice meeting with the execs and said, sorry, that was way before Disney owned them. But, they had nothing else to pitch at the time.
I had no idea about the connection with the Wuzzles, man. I loved the Wuzzles growing up. That was the one where there's like Butter Bear, where it's like different animals put together. Like there was like plushes, and man, I used to love that shit, dude. I ate that stuff up. Absolutely. All right. Well, we got a little bit of time left, so let's get into this. Dynamite picked up some licenses recently. Darkwing Duck is one. Gargoyles is one. They brought Greg in to work on Gargoyles. He's been doing a fantastic job, as usual, with the property that he helped create and did create. And then Darkwing Duck. And Tad, you've kind of been there to like support it, and you've been doing covers and things like that. What was it that brought this project together, where finally, after like 30 years, we have Gargoyles and Darkwing Duck crossing over?
Yes, the crossover that everybody was not waiting for. It was actually...
Well, there's such different tones of shows, too, so I'm very interested to see what you guys do, because, you got this, like, parody of, like, Pulp Fiction heroes with this, like, arrogant superhero vigilante, and then you got Gargoyles, which is this really deep, dramatic kind of show. I'm just very curious how you're going to put these things together and how that idea came across.
I will say this, since it was announced, I've seen all the online, or a lot of the online chatter about, how are they going to mix these two universes? Is it going to be a multiverse thing? Is it this or that? And my answer to that is, you'll have to buy the comic to see what we did and how these worlds came together. But I got to say, again, Greg was part of Darkwing, since day one. So he certainly knew that vibe. And before we even talked together, I think we both realized that the threat had to come from the Gargoyles world to give it a real sense of adventure. Greg provided that. He did an initial pitch, and I kind of gave notes. We talked back and forth. And Greg can really talk to that stuff, because he, I always thought these ducks can do anything. We've done bizarre stories, from Twin Beaks to, to going into the human world to, doing all sorts of, weird stories. So they're capable of anything, but Gargoyles is Gargoyles, and I think Greg had a ton of fun writing the ducks.
I did. I really did. It was a kid. I think Tad was on a show with Nick.
Nick Barucci, is he the publisher of?
Yeah, and it came up then.
Yeah, Nick is the one who pitched it. Yeah,
I think Gargoyles is one of Dynamite's best-selling books. I assume Darkwing is too. So it just became kind of a financial natural.
I run a comic shop, and they both sell really well for me, and I'm very excited for this.
Yeah, I'm glad. And so Nate Cosby, who's my editor on all the Gargoyles stuff, contacted me and said, how would you like to do and I was already working on, at the time, the Gargoyles Fantastic Four crossovers. And he said, how would you like to do another crossover with Darkwing Duck? And I'm like, yeah, I'd love to, as long as I could work with Tad on it. And then I think Tad said more or less the same thing in reverse, and pretty soon we were all on an email chain together, and then there were some phone calls, and I pitched something that felt natural. I don't want to go into too much detail because I'm not big on spoilers, but the idea of Demona and Morgana from the 2 series having a sorceress encounter as sort of the initiating incident of the whole thing just seemed fun to me. And then, I'd say the tone of the book, got a 4-issue miniseries, starts January 18th and goes monthly from there, is probably more on the Darkwing side of things than the Gargoyle side of things. I think
Greg was really having fun writing the Ducks. Obviously, he's done a ton of Gargoyle stuff, but this was funny. At one point, I think I even suggested that
Gargoyles is that there's enough flexibility. The show always had more humor. I wouldn't call us a comedy, but we always had more humor than people gave us credit. People always say, "Oh yeah, that was that dark show that Disney did in the '90s." I'm like, well, yeah, kind of. I guess
it happened at night. Yes. So.
Yeah, it happened at night, but we didn't do. It wasn't like and I'm not knocking this, but Batman the Animated Series did their backgrounds on black paper, right? We didn't do that. We felt that the Gargoyles were alive at night, so to them that was the colors of their world, so to speak. So it was blues and purples and magentas. It was dark colors, but it was full of color and all sorts of stuff. And we always had romance and humor and all sorts of stuff in the show. So that allows us, to put Goliath and Elisa and Darkwing and Morgana. You've got these 2, romantic couples with various problems toward their ongoing relationship. For Goliath and Elisa, there's the minor problem that they're 2 completely different species. For Darkwing and Morgana, there's the minor problem that Darkwing's ego is out of control. But there were plenty of parallels, fun things that we could sort of set up against each other. Darkwing has a daughter, Goslin, obviously. Goliath has a daughter, Angela. There were all sorts of things that we could have some fun with if we didn't take it too seriously. And so we didn't take it too seriously at all. In fact, if anything, we took it as unseriously as we could, but we still made the threat feel real and dangerous. And that's the fun of it. And so I've had a blast on it. I think Tad has too. I think we're getting some great art from Chiro. And I'm thrilled with it. And I'm excited for the fans to see it in January.
Yeah, Chiro Cangelosi does an incredible job of capturing the life of an animated character, to really suggest movement when obviously comics are still image, but he's been fantastic at just how he poses things out, and every once in a while we've had to push him toward the adventure side, especially when we hit New York. Shouldn't feel like St. Canard. But make it, do the sorcerer stuff. Let's make it moodier. Let's get the coloring to have a little more goth flavor to it. But in general, it's been great. Yeah.
Heck yeah. I'm very excited to check it out. I know we got to let you guys go. You're very busy. Thank you so much for taking time. But Gentle Savage does have a couple questions, one for each of you. Greg, do you have a personal favorite episode or storyline from the first 2 seasons of Gargoyles?
I mean, I'm like a proud papa who kind of loves all of it. But I think if I had to pick one single 22-minute episode, The Mirror feels like one where we were really, unless you're comparing it to one of our big 5-parters or 3-parters or something like that. If you just want to pick one episode, The Mirror, where we introduced Puck, that really felt like the show was firing on all cylinders. It's there's real threat, real energy and danger to it, but there's also romance and there's a lot of humor in it. Brent Spiner played Puck and did an amazing job, and we got some just fantastic animation on it. And that animation inspired us all the way down the post-production line, so that I think even our sound effects are better in that episode. I just got everyone's juices going, and we got great performances from our leads, and Marina Sirtis and Keith David and Sally Richardson and Jeff Bennett, Bill Fagerbakke, Tom Adcox, Ed Asner, um, and then this great guest role from Brent. And so if I had,
was it your casting director that brought in all the TNG vocal actors?
It really started with Marina auditioning for Elisa.
Okay.
And we thought she wasn't quite right for Elisa, but thought she might be great for Damona. But we didn't have audition sites ready for Damona yet. So we had to ask her to come back. And she did come back, and she was the first person to audition for Damona. And she knocked it out of the park. Now, we had like 20 other Damona auditions scheduled for that day, so we couldn't give her the part in that moment because you never know. But she was the one who got it. And then later, Jonathan Frakes auditioned for Xanatos, and he got cast. And what that created in the room is that, we're recording an episode. They're two of our regulars. They're there nearly every week. They're villains, so they're not literally there every week. But, most weeks, one or the other or both of them are there. And we'd be, in the control room, and our voice director was also our casting director, Jamie Thomason, would say, okay, what are we going to need for next week? What are the new characters, the guest characters? And I'd be like, well, we've got Goliath's brother Coldstone coming on, so he needs to have deep chops like Keith David. And I'm looking through the glass, we're on a break, right? But I'm looking through the glass at Marina and Jonathan. So I'm like, what about Michael Dorn, who plays Worf on Star Trek? And they're like, oh, yeah, that's a great idea. And so we bring Michael in, and pretty soon we got LeVar. Then we cast Nichelle Nichols as Elise's mom, which was wonderful. And then at some point, it clicked for us that this could actually, we'd never cast anyone who was wrong for a role just for publicity reasons, but publicity doesn't hurt, right? So if you could get the right person for the right role who happened to be a Star Trek actor, that helps us out. And then at some point, it just became fun, like, okay, can we get someone from Voyager? Can we get someone from Deep Space Nine? We get, and so pretty soon we had someone from all of the 4 series that at least existed at that time. And the thing to keep in mind is, other than the original series, those, when we started Gargoyles, Next Generation was still going. It wasn't like that one was over already. It was still going. And then while we were going, Deep Space Nine started, and then Voyager, they were all happening at the time. But what we had is Jonathan and Marina sort of telling people at Paramount, it's a good gig. The scripts are good. You got no makeup. You don't have to spend 3 hours at 4 a.m. getting here before your call.
Michael Dorn's like, I'm in.
Yeah.
You can wear whatever you want.
No bumps on your head.
You can wear whatever you want, and you don't even have to memorize the script. And it's a nice check for 3 hours of work. And I think they had fun. I really think, to this day, I'm still friendly with Marina and Jonathan and Brent. And they'll tell you they had a good time doing the show. And you go to the regulars like Keith David or Tom Adcox, and they have tremendously fond memories of doing the show. We had fun.
Heck
And
yeah.
what was fun about those days is, and I don't know that any show does it this way anymore, is we recorded the cast together generally. We would really schedule things so every character was there. Sometimes you'd say, okay, you 3 don't show up till Act 2, so you can sit in the green room and eat Oreos and potato chips or whatever's out there. But generally, that was so much fun just to listen to them talking to each other, but they're playing off of each other and all that. It was an editing thing where they liked the lines clean, but you still had a different energy. And now you commonly hear actors kind of complaining about, you never get to act across from somebody, or
being in a room by themselves or something like that, right? Yeah.
And that was fun.
That was sort of features game even back then, but in TV we always recorded everybody together.
Yeah.
And then, and it was really the pandemic that caused this. But now, getting a whole cast together is very, very rare, and it's hard to do. And people are recording from their in-home studios, and they don't. Some of them want to come in, but some of them don't, and some of them have not so secretly moved out of town. You know, it's like, oh yeah, I record from my home studio in downtown Burbank. Are you sure you're in Burbank? Because it looks like you're in Tennessee right now.
Yeah.
You know, if you're in Burbank, why don't you just come down here? I might not be able to make that, but I can do it from here. You know, and I get it. I understand. You know, cost of living in California is expensive, and LA is extremely expensive, and I get all that. But at the same time, we've lost something. We really have.
Yes, and some of it did come from
right through. Halfway through season 4 of Young Justice, we were doing group cast recordings. Then the pandemic hit, and we had to figure out a way to record it all, frankly. And then once we did, it was still one person at a time. But and I think we got good performances. Great voice director and Jamie Thomason, and great actors, and they did great. But we've lost something that you get from them being able to listen to each other and play off each other, and the energy that builds in a room is something special, and I really miss it.
If you hunt for it on YouTube, you will find there was one day I took the video camera into the rehearsal room, and it was one of the episodes of Justice Ducks. So not only did you have all the hero characters, you had all the villain characters there, and Jeannie McSwain, our voice director on that show and casting director, you see how fast she works to keep the energy up, and everybody's making notes and all of that. And, you know, it's just, man, I wish it was a better video camera than I took at the time, but wish I had done that more, because it really gives you, it was never that crazy, because that was like 13 people in a room, in a very small room. But yeah, those are the days. I mean, Chip and Dale I did with 4 people, you know, pretty much. It was Jim Cummings, Tress MacNeille, Corey Burton, and usually a guest star. But 3 of those people could do, you know, a couple of thousand voices each. So, you know, it was a different thing, but it was just fun.
Yeah, Jim is a legend. Jim is a legend in the voice acting profession, right? All right, one more quick question from Gentle. He wants to know, Tad, have you ever seen the 2017 DuckTales? If so, what do you think about it?
Oh, I loved it. I really enjoy that version more than the original. Now, again, I wasn't a kid while the original was done, so that's going to have a different impact at you. But I just thought the scripts were really well written. It was now the era of, let's do a season arc, story arc, which obviously not a Darkwing. We had no arcs at all. You know, really planning things out ahead of time. I remember, and I visited, you know, the people at the studio. I remember one of the writers said, Tad, how big was your writer's room on Darkwing? I said, there was no writer's room. The writer comes in, throws ideas at me. I go, we've done that one or this. And then they'd walk out with a premise and they'd write it up, and that would be that. And they couldn't believe, you know, the schedule we had, because we, at a point, had to do 1 script a week, and then the next week 2 scripts, 1, 2, 1, 2. And it was just insane. The idea of letting the writing staff get together before production to map out stories and get a head start was just something we didn't do. But I loved what they did. And Frank Angonis, who's the co-producer and head of story on that show, in my first visit, we were talking Darkwing, and he said, Tad, it's the worst kept secret in the studio that the show Frank wants to do is Darkwing Duck. And I said, I was making a point that Goslin is really the heart of the show. And he stopped me and said, no, Tad, we get it. Darkwing Duck is a story of a father and a daughter and a launch pad. That's it. You know, and I said, okay, you get it.
Every father and daughter have a launch pad, by the way. Yeah. You know, that's what's
and they brought it, you know, they obviously included him in the series toward the end and kind of did their backdoor pilot for it. And actually were coming up with a full pitch, you know, that then they opened it up to other people, and other people, you know, taken over. But no, I thought they did a great job, and it's very funny. And the idea of how they introduced Darkwing to be inspired by an actor playing this fictional character, I thought it was great. and the introduction of Negaduck, was excellent.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. All right. I really appreciate everybody watching. Greg, Tad, thank you so much. We were supposed to let Greg go 10 minutes ago, so we're going to do that. Go check out Gargoyles Darkwing Duck from Dynamite Entertainment, January, at your local comic book shop. Pre-order it now. There's a cover from Tad. They're working on it together. It's going to be fun. I mean, what more can you want? Darkwing Duck and Gargoyles mashed together from the actual people who were working and creating those series. So y'all go check it out. We are dipping out.